Okay, welcome to another episode of Leverage. I have Joel Fox with us today. He is the COO and co-founder of Doormat.ca. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I got involved with Reach Canada a few years ago through a very good friend of mine, Natalka Falcomer, who recommended me as a mentor, which was such an honor, for some of the greatest and coolest tech innovative ideas that are coming into the real estate space. And Doormat was one of them. So as I mentioned, I had Perch on, which was kind of almost the digital version of mortgage brokers or the mortgage process. And so you're the digital version of the legal closing buy or sell.
Yeah.
So, let's get into it. Tell me, first of all, why you guys decided to start this, because this is a big, it's a big piece to chew.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, to start, there's three of us that are co-founders in the business, two of us that are non-lawyers, and one who's a real estate lawyer and has worked in real estate his whole career. The two of us that are not real estate lawyers purchased homes ourselves, went through the whole process, and for the most part had a pretty great experience until we got to the real estate lawyer portion of the equation. We didn't feel supported, felt that there could be more technology involved in the process, just generally felt that it could be better. And then our third co-founder, who's the real estate lawyer himself, has worked in the industry for a long time. And again, always felt that it could be better. So we've come at it from call it two different angles, from the consumer lens and leveraging our experience in other industries, and then from the actual professional lens of someone who's been in the industry for a good chunk of time.
Well, they always say that people invent things that they need, right? That they can't find, right? So they're like, wouldn't it be really cool if we could have X? So it's interesting to hear. So yourself and one of the other co-founders purchased a property by yourselves, meaning you didn't use an agent.
No, we did use an agent.
Oh, you did use an agent. Okay,
yes.
Interesting. And by the way, I as we were talking before we started filming, I think that all of these products, I mean, even myself, whatever it is not for everybody. So I think I'm trying to drill down, who were you in that real estate process? Because I think there are people who will flock to this and really gravitate to this. Yeah. I think there are people who don't want to use agents, not because they hate us, but just because they're like, you know what, I can do myself. I want to buy it on here and I will have the information and I'll do it and I'm good. And not to use the word automated, but they do want a streamlined process versus I don't want to talk to that person.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think from my perspective as a purchaser myself, my wife and I bought a property together. We felt that there were certain parts of that home buyer journey that could be more streamlined, if you will. But my experience with my agent was great.
Awesome.
And she was awesome. And I know Robert was the same with his. It really was the part of the journey that was the real estate lawyer part. And that's why we've dived into it.
And did you use a lawyer that both your agents recommended?
Yeah.
Okay. And again, this is not a shot at anybody. I'm just trying to understand the process again.
Totally.
So for people who maybe have never purchased a property or have purchased a property and also had a bad experience, what did you find didn't go well?
I just felt it's in the dark the whole time. So never really, even after the whole process was done in working with my real estate lawyer, I didn't actually know what they did. I just got a bill at the end of it to pay for their services. And it just left me a little bit confused about what I was paying for. And then throughout that whole journey up until my property actually closed, I had a lot of anxiety. It's the biggest purchase of my life, at least so far. And I didn't know what was happening. The communication wasn't overly strong, and there was nowhere that I could look to get the information that I needed. Okay. And again, I looked at this part of the journey as something that could be a little bit more streamlined. So, I can't fault my lawyer for not being overly responsive, because I didn't try too much to get a hold of them.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
For sure. And I have a one of the best lines I ever heard from a lawyer. I actually don't remember if he was a real estate lawyer or not, was just lawyers are not good at managing expectations. Yeah. And by the way, I think that goes in all professions, quite honestly. Also, I think there are agents that don't walk you through the process, that don't really help you understand what's going to happen from beginning to end. Sometimes we go through the motions so many times, we just assume everybody else understands how it works. So believe me, I've been doing this for a long, long time. And sometimes I have to be reminded just to actually break up. Like, I think there's 5 steps, and on the buyer side, there's 20 steps.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. So going back to that. So even if you had asked, maybe you didn't get the information, maybe you didn't, what now do you offer from Doormat? So I, as I mentioned, I went on the website, I went down far enough the rabbit hole, I'm sure, to get retargeted for the rest of my life, but I didn't upload my agreement of purchase and sale. So maybe you can, walk us through like what you give to that buyer or seller that will allow that visibility, that will allow the updates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just kind of bridge the gap between my own experience and the experience of the broader mass that we've heard in just talking to prospective clients and kind of figuring things out as we started to build Doormat. Was one of the biggest complaints is about that communication factor. So there's not only the like setting of expectations, but even just the ongoing communication and bedside manner, broadly is not the greatest, although of course there's exceptions across the board. Right. So what we really focused on in building Doormat is on 2 levels. So one, we thought that technology could greatly improve the experience. And with that, what we provide is a platform that our clients onboard into once they've purchased, sold a home. We also support refinances. Yes. And so we get a copy of the agreement of purchase and sale once that has been signed, and we invite our clients to onboard into our platform. Okay. With that, we collect a bunch of information that we need to know from them.
It's an intake form, like you're filling out all your information online.
Exactly. Okay. Sharing and collecting all the information that any real estate lawyer would need to collect from their client.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we automate that process, and then you come into a personalized dashboard that shows you where we are at as the legal service supporting you in that property closing process, and then shows you all the different steps along the way that we'll be completing in order to close on the property.
So you have a dashboard. You created a dashboard for someone, if I'm getting that correct.
Yeah.
And they can go into that dashboard at any time and see if you're at the title search portion, Now, how do you work in conjunction with getting, for example, like the mortgage folder from and I said the same thing to Alec, like on Perch, like I'm not your customer, but I recognize like jury of one. Yeah, and I have a client that we're working with right now, just on a rental perspective, who's not even comfortable having her documents in like a Google folder that we can share. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So the thought that you have people, and granted they're different generation and all that good stuff, but there's a lot of, I'm sure, concern for, having all of that available.
Data security and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. So to the first question, which was about how do we interact with mortgage. So, for those listening that aren't familiar with how the whole property closing process works, there is a lawyer involved that has to be representing the buyers, and then another lawyer that has to represent the sellers. But very much the whole property closing work is more of a project management exercise than anything. And so engaging with the mortgage professionals is a part of that project management exercise that we have to do. So we collect those mortgage documents, we facilitate the disbursement of that mortgage, and that's one part of the process that we do. And then in terms of storage, documents are stored everywhere. So in the kind of older days of this space, they are stored in they're physically stored in locations. So now we're more storage in the cloud, digitally stored. But we work in accordance with the rules and regulations of the Law Society of Ontario.
For sure. And I mean, again, I just, I think you're of a certain age that you're not putting your credit card in the internet, my 95-year-old grandmother, but listen, I get it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came up for me in this process and I thought about was, so simplifying it, explaining it, giving that dashboard. I had a first-time buyer just purchased his first condo. We're going to close next month. One of the lawyers that we use, walked him through on an hour call to talk him through all the pieces of what a status certificate was. And again, he's exceptional. So I get that, there are several really good ones out there that will do it. And I prefer to work with those people because I do believe that you should have communication. You should have, and I also think that comes from the agent also, an agent explaining to them, here are the next things. You don't actually have to be in the city when you're closing. People are like, I can't be here. I can't close on that day because I'm not going to be in the country.
Yeah.
Everything's done beforehand.
Yeah, things have changed.
Right? Things have changed. Having said that, I also had another lawyer who does everything in person, and it took my client 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's both sides, but talking about visibility in a dashboard. So I'm going to use Doormat. I'm going to buy a condo. Status certificate needs to be, is one of the conditions. Talk to me. How does that work?
Yeah. So, that leads us into the pricing conversation as well. And so we want to be super transparent about how we price our services. And so we give a quote before we provide any services. We want the client to know what they're going to be paying for ahead of time.
Okay.
So something like a status certificate review, we are pricing that whole experience out ahead of time.
Okay. So sorry to interrupt you. So when I went on and it was pricing, you have a flat rate for buy and sell.
Yeah.
But that's just the deal is done, you're reviewing it, and there's no there's no sideways kind of extras on that. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So the way that any deal is priced,
it's burger without the toppings. Yeah.
Yeah. There's our fee, which is the money that we make off of property closing.
Yep.
Which is where you see the most variability across different competitors in this space.
Yep.
And then you have disbursements, which are basically the costs that we incur as the legal provider to facilitate that property closing.
Yep.
So those are going to be more consistent across the board because that's just being the kind of throughway for those costs to be covered. But where you see more variability is the actual property closing fee. So listed on our website, we try to give as much transparency on what you could expect. And then when a client comes through to us referred by either an agent or coming through our own intake form, we give a deeper breakdown of what those costs will be based on their purchase price. Because something like title insurance is purely based on, or is primarily based on the purchase price of a property. So we wouldn't be able to give a reasonable estimate without that.
But is a status certificate a flat rate, or do you do it based on hourly?
Yeah. So we don't actually charge for status certificate reviews.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Under the hope and assumption that if the status certificate review is a positive one and the client decides to move forward with the property purchase, under the assumption that they would come to us, and that hasn't been a problem so far. So usually clients have been, and typically those come through agents, pretty well intentioned on that front, and if they're happy with our services on the status certificate, then they come with us.
And same with home inspections?
Anything that's kind of pre-work to facilitating the property closing, we don't charge for.
Okay, so typical for most lawyers. They assume that someone's going to come back, they're looking for a home. Okay, so where do fees get added on? Where are the tomatoes and pickles and
so that's where it is a little bit complicated in this space. So our fee for a purchase, for a sale, and a refinance is $979 plus HST.
Right.
Already that's definitely lower than average.
40%. Depending.
And but and this is where clients get frustrated, is where amounts are added is as you approach closing. And then it's okay, well, this came up, I had to do this other thing, I spent more time on facilitating payouts because you had way too many credit cards that needed to be paid out on your sale. That what typically happens is that's going to be reflected in the final bill,
Right.
and that's not necessarily predicted at the start.
Right.
From our perspective, those things average out over time, so we don't end up actually charging additional amounts for that.
Okay.
The one thing where there does become variability in our pricing is if our pricing is based on, for a purchase, one mortgage involved, and for a sale, one mortgage being discharged.
Okay.
If there's an additional mortgage involved on either side of that, we ask that ahead of time and we provide that quote ahead of time.
Okay, so there's all of those questions prior to the intake and the quote and all of that stuff.
Exactly.
So you're trying to avoid any kind of surprises down the line.
Exactly. We're not necessarily we want to be competitive with our pricing, but we're not looking to be the lowest of the low because we provide good service as well. What we're trying to be is predictable and not surprising.
Right.
And that's where people start to feel bad about the experience as if they're told one thing at the beginning and then at the end it's completely different.
Right, for sure. For example, so a couple of scenarios we talked about before, but like a closing gets shifted. It's like, how do you, going back even to the stat certificate or the home inspection, who is going through? So I was using the example of the lawyer, like you're not automated, you're digital, but so who is that person who's going to get on the phone with an anxious buyer who wants to talk to someone? Yeah. Right? And has lots of questions.
Yeah. And so that's a really key part of our business too. So I mentioned the kind of one side of where we're looking to improve things is through technology. But the other side is through support and actually having a client focused mindset. So we've built our platform to be as proactive in terms of sharing information as possible so that those that want to self-serve can leverage that. But on top of that, we do have that client-first mindset where we make ourselves available. So we are fully virtual, so we don't meet in person, but we make ourselves available via phone, email, and chat.
Okay.
And we don't hide our lawyer in that scenario either. So the lawyer is available for discussion.
So there's a name. There's not a Rick's on the chatbot line for you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a real person every time, and and there's no AI involved in what we do.
Yeah.
And it's a real person answering every time, and we support our clients as a team. So the lawyer isn't necessarily always the best person to answer the question. Sometimes it might be the lead who's coordinating the file. And then in that case, that's the person who answers. And then in the case of, status certificate reviews, it's the lawyer that's discussing that.
Right, for sure. I mean, there's paralegals that do most of the work at the end of the day also and requesting IDs and all of that stuff as well. Yeah. And it's interesting because, my first thought also is well, they're just trying to automate it. And sorry, no dirty word, but they're trying to automate it. He told me not to use that word. Automate it. They're trying to be the lower cost. And so it's interesting, if I'm getting this right, that it's really just a matter of having someone, it's just an online lawyer almost. I know that sounds really simple, but I want to simplify the process for someone who's listening, because you might say, okay, well, I need a lawyer. I don't need someone. And by the way, I recommend clients who are not Bay Street lawyers. Sorry for all of you out there, but I say to them, on a simple closing, unless we're getting into some massive project, you don't need to be paying those kind of prices for someone's overhead, for someone's, huge law firm that has to be, collecting a certain amount of hours to make partner.
Exactly.
So, it sounds like a very relatable approach to it, in that it's just affordable. And I also use people who very much are willing to handhold, explain, give them a checklist, give them okay, it's September 1st. What's going to happen between now and November 1st? Walk them through what the next 2 months are going to look like. Yeah. And did you really felt like that just didn't exist enough out there?
Yeah, certainly not. I mean, from the tech component of what we deliver, there's very little out there that compares to what we've built. And then even from a support perspective, like I said, across any industry, you're going to have the good, the bad, the ugly. There's incredible lawyers and law firms out there that provide that like hands-on support, make a client feel like they know what's happening.
Yeah.
But on average, the accessibility to those types of lawyers or those types of firms, it's just not accessible to everyone. They're more expensive because they're better.
And would you say that your specialty would just be not just, but like really is like I know you do financing, but like that you really do like the purchase and sale of like resale, condos or homes or freeholds or whatever it is. Do you get into like assignments? Do you get into co-ops? Do you get into like some of those like exterior commercial?
Definitely not commercial, all residential. We've been involved in assignments. We've been involved in new builds. Definitely our bread and butter is resale, sale and purchase. But, we've been involved in all of the rest of that as well outside of commercial. And reason being is we see those very much like that project management expertise is kind of the large majority of what needs to happen in a property closing in residential.
Right.
That shifts in commercial. There's a little bit more kind of legal expertise that needs to be applied there and some more variability in that process and paperwork involved. And so it's not really a good fit for us.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Okay. So if you had to sum up your ideal client, like there's someone out there, they're thinking, sounds interesting. I'm intrigued. Am I the right person? Who would you say that ideal customer is for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we slice and dice it. Ideal customer for us is someone that is a first or second time home buyer. Probably a millennial, Gen Z, someone that's a little bit more tech savvy. Although you don't need to be tech savvy, it's pretty straightforward.
I'm tech savvy. I'm just not a millennial.
Well, and that's what I say. It's not a perfect slice and dice. I'm making fun
of myself. It's all good. Yes.
But yeah, that's typically where we're seeing our client base trend to. And more than that, it's those that are looking for self-service. So a lot of the people love the fact that like we have a pretty robust help center that they can find the answer that they're looking for. We walk them through the whole process digitally, so they don't necessarily have to reach out to us, but then we provide the comfort to know that they can. So that's the majority of our clients who are looking for, a fair price, clarity on what we're doing the whole time, and more of that self-service angle.
Self-service is a big one, I think.
Totally.
Also,
yeah.
As I mentioned, it was intrigued me. And I think there are people who want to do that, as I said. Like, I think there are people who want to buy a property without an agent because they just want an automated experience that doesn't involve a person. Like, I looked at it and I was like, why would I upload my own purchase? Like, I just paid an agent. Yeah. Why would I do all of this, right? Yeah. But I get that there are people who just don't want to have that interaction at all. They're like, I'm going to send it. Let me know what I need to do. I'll get back to you. Like, I'll look it up when I'm ready. Yeah. And from a standpoint of also, like your reachable hours, like, are you guys available 24/7? I know there's no AI involved, but I think that that's also an element of like, people are like, oh, it's 5:00. Lawyers aren't. Friday in the summer. Sorry, y'all. But like, we don't work on Fridays, right?
Yeah. So our operating hours are 8 to 8, Monday to Friday.
Okay.
And then we're always monitoring stuff for emergencies outside of those hours. So we're pretty accessible most of the time in property closings. There's not large emergencies, but they do come up. So that's why we monitor.
Yeah.
But the 8 to 8 hours seem to be really helpful. Like we actually don't get that much reach out.
No, I'm sure. But even to 8:00 is quite late.
Yeah. And that was my problem. And that was, personally, as I was going through the whole property closing process, is I defaulted to wanting something that was self-serve, mainly because I worked in that 9 to 5 range, and then lawyers were only available 9 to 5. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess
I'm not talking to anybody. Yeah.
So that's where, we're great for someone like that because they're able to see what's happening on their own time. But then we're also able to get answers to those clients when they have questions after work, before work, that type of thing.
Interesting. I mean, I have 9,000 scenarios that I feel like I want to ask you whether you'd be able to deal with them, but I won't bore the listeners. So, okay. So if anyone is interested, they can check out Doormat.ca, basically.
Yeah.
And all your contact info is on there as well, but we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being with us. That was super cool. I'm
Thanks,
gonna
Rachel.
play around with it a little bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.